LinkedIn echo chamber. This is ML's like Team Spirit. George is back with us. Hi, George.
Hiya.
George, I asked you to come back because last time I met you, you were telling me about well, not a unique data source, but a sort of it's come across less commonly, as a data scientist. So you're here today because we're talking about speech data and audio data, and you have a background in this by, working for a brand that's doing speech analytics for God knows which sectors, all kinds of sectors where there's kind of customer contact centers and these sorts of things. And I'm going to let you explain it all and the benefits of, by using data to increase the scale. But I will start the episode by talking about my life in a contact center. And it goes like this. You were telling me that you can reach a lot more calls by using the data and reach a lot more coverage of conversations. And I was thinking, I'm glad it didn't happen when I was a young man. When I was 20, I worked in a call center, George. And I managed to survive. I managed to survive my first couple of years in a part-time job because my manager would only talk to me about the 3 calls a month that they measured. I was in a bit of a rogue team where we just messed around non-stop, and thankfully the 3 calls a month never really picked up on my wild behaviour. So it was always like, "Hey, good call, John." They managed to pick the right ones. So I'm glad I didn't work in customer services at a time that you
I'm
were.
sure you weren't that bad. I'm sure
Well,
you weren't that bad.
you always big. You always think you were. You always think you were crazy when you were young. I was probably. But you're going to tell us about how the use of data has really accelerated from my experience of just like a couple of calls being measured into a really quite advanced way of doing it and sort of application. So you've got such a great story. I'm going to let you take it away. Could you start with like what that company was doing and just the picture?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was one of the co-founders of the startup, which had a real focus on speech analytics. And one of the things that we always found was speech analytics is incredibly expensive for most businesses. It's not uncommon to see speech analytics implementations that cost sort of low mid 6 figures. So there's a lot of businesses out there that weren't doing a huge amount of call recording, and they were still doing the quality assurance in the way that you described. It's a QA team who sat there listening to calls all day every day and just marking the agents. So you'll typically have about 1 QA analyst to about anywhere between 40 and 60 different agents, and their job is just to call screen and mark the calls as to did they do this, did they do this, did they do this, and summarize that into a report. So basically what we found was we could use deep learning techniques to transcribe audio for far, far cheaper. What I went in and built was basically something that was maybe didn't have the accuracy, but we could cover that with natural language processing, but was much cheaper to run. So our cost price was around 5p per hour. So, significantly cheaper, and it was super fast as well. So we could transcribe an operation's entire history of calls and then use the natural language processing algorithms to tidy all of that data up and get some really good insight.
George, can you just kind of fill a little gap in my mind? Okay, so can you tell me how that data moves from agent has a call, data goes somewhere, ends up in your system? Can you just describe that for me? Because I was just thinking as you were speaking, and shout out to RSA alumni. Anyone that I worked with will remember that we had a comms room where call recording tech that was new in the year 2000 was something that looked like a NASA computer the size of the entire room, and it had to be climate controlled, and actually it still recorded calls on DAT tapes, and you had to change those tapes when they ran out of capacity, and that was 24 years ago. So what changed that meant you could access this data, or that brands could provide this data at such, I don't know, I presume they didn't bring a suitcase full of DAT tapes to you. So what kind of changes happened around some of the technology? Oh God, you're going to tell me there
You'd
were
be
DAT.
surprised.
All right. What move like from I'm having a conversation, what is happening to that data until it gets to you?
Yeah, so it really varied based on the deployment. There are some businesses who they outsource all of their call recording. Pretty much everyone's recording calls these days in some form or another. A lot of them are outsourced, and they can be quite difficult to get a hold of. But once they've gotten a hold of them, we stick them on a private S3 bucket in AWS, and that we then have access to that to run all the processes that we needed to do.
So you've taken the data down to natural language by this point with the transcription, and it's cheaper than competitors, and you found a way to do it. So our audience here can get a feel for what you're really looking for. What is then happening to the data so you can show these brands something interesting? Like what is kind of happening here, and how would you describe it?
Yeah, so really we had two different ways of looking at the data. The first way was your more traditional sort of string matching exercises. So we tidied up the data as much as we could to sort of make it match typical speech patterns. And then you can do string matching to say, right, when an agent says the name of this product, then they've mentioned it, so they can get a tick on their QA scorecard effectively on this call. If they haven't, then they haven't. The other way that we did it was using topic modeling. So what that consists of is effectively we scan all of the text that we've generated, and we're looking for specific patterns within that text. So we can pull out one topic which might be about a specific product, one that might be about a specific process, and then we can run things like sentiment analysis over the top of that to understand which topics are generally more positive or more negative. And we can also run like handling time analysis over it as well. So you can see, right, this topic about this process is related with a huge amount of time that's being spent within the contact center, and it's also resulting in really negative conversations with our customer service team. So we need to make some changes there, basically.
So George, you've just walked into my trap. You've just walked into my trap that I hoped you would walk into. So George, a lot of the population of the world has lived, had a life in a call center. There are famously, web pages and Facebook groups where you can talk about experiences in the call center. And I've looked at these things and found them hilarious, quite frankly, because there's loads of wild and wacky stories. Are there any novel little topics or clusters or segments that you don't have to name the client, but there's any weird and wacky ones that you could describe to us that were just, I don't know, most comical or most outrageous?
Oh, good question. Bear with me.
Do you have a profanity one? Do you have anything like this where you like profanity string matching, or found any outrageous agents or anything like this?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, actually. We had this was more driven internally rather than anything that we saw in the data. But in our demo platform that we would use, obviously, to demo to prospective clients, some of which were quite big businesses, somebody had gone in and made a string matching event and named it. I won't name the person, but it was person who works at the business is a very naughty boy. And that came up during a demo to a multi-million-pound business that we were pitching to. So that's one of the big ones. We have also seen a lot of stuff where customers are swearing and stuff. That's obviously related to very negative sentiment. But yeah, we try and sort of guide the topics as much as we could into the processes and the products that were relevant to the business.
So it sounds like lots of benefits then. So the topics kind of give you, these are all the things that happen in these conversations on a massive scale. So my stupid story was normally, customer contact management would be about, we listen to 200 calls and we think a fifth of them are unhappy, a fifth of them are happy, 10% contain a cross sell. So you are able to quantify that suddenly on a massive scale, probably go down to way more detail than human judgment. How many give us an idea, if just take a rough average on everything you ever did, how many topics are created when you study a massive data set of speech?
Yeah, so we generated topics across a variety of different sort of levels within the data. So we'd start out with one that was high level. That would be anywhere between 5 and about 20 different topics. We would then look at specific teams. And again, that would be another 5 to 20. And then specific skills, as they're called in the contact center, which is like different types of calls. And we do it there as well. So for one client, we could easily have like over 200 topics. And it's so how you visualize that becomes really important, because we can then, the way that we used it, as I say, was with this handling time versus sentiment view. So you can look at things and say, right, this topic over here really stands out because it's huge handling time, very, very negative. There's some that are very low handling time, but very negative. And then the ones that are positive are sort of easier to justify. And it's not just about identifying the ones that are high handling time and negative. Handling time is a bit of a loaded topic within the contact center industry, because it's what every contact center is marked on. Basically, it's agent productivity. What you miss there is there are some calls which are really, really long, but they have a really good result at the end, and they really delight the customer and increase the likelihood that they're going to come back and all this sort of good stuff. So by layering over that sentiment as well, you can also say, right, these calls are taking a long time, but they're having a really positive impact. So we don't really want to spend too much time, berating the agents who are driving that handling time.
Well, let's get down to the impact, George, because I started this off because the AI mania was driving me crazy of like, AI is going to 10x your business. It sounds like you've just told me about, a workflow with an interesting data source, multiple pieces of machine learning, really, that suddenly shine a light on all data and all experiences rather than this little subset that luckily I was only ever exposed to. Pick a case study from one of these clients that you worked with. What would be a statement of the impact that you saw in terms of then the actions that they took? Are we talking, they can do something that increases sales 10%, or there's just like this multi-million-pound impact as a result of a program? Like, what was the outcomes of just one of these, your favorite one?
So I think one of my favorite ones was one of the really early ones that we did, actually, more as a consultancy based team. And that was where a lot of the visualizations that we built into the platform came from. It's things that we had success with when we were working as a consultancy. And we plotted this graph, which was, basically a scatter chart saying handling time versus sentiment for different types of call. And a couple of things came out of it. There were a few types of calls that were in there. I can't say what they are without revealing who the client was. I don't want to do that. So there were a few types of calls that came through as being a lot more negative than they were expecting. And that turned out to be because, people were cherry picking QA calls, basically. And that allowed them to put in mechanisms to better control a QA, and also to control that process better as well. So I think I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but we estimated sort of a high 6-figure return on that particular initiative. One of the things that's really important with all this, though, is communicating the results well, because we can highlight the things that are maybe not working as efficiently and the things that are working efficiently. But if it's not communicated well, there's no real so what there. There's no specific action that they can take. It needs to be handed over to people within the organization who have the knowledge and the seniority within the business to actually make those changes. So that's one of the things that we really focused on.
George, amen. Everyone watching this will recognize that. So thanks for the reminder. But George, we're hitting time. Thanks for taking us through all of that. That was a really interesting one. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been ML's Like Team Spirit.